The Storied Way perspective is a few months late. I announced the podcast sometime in February, and I wanted to launch it on World Storytelling Day. So in 2024, I complete 10 years as a storyteller, as an entrepreneur, and somebody who's been tinkering with stories for a long time. I felt it was a good culmination, a good step ahead to create a podcast which sort of sums up a large part of what I do and a lot of things which I want to do and which I dream of doing, but others are doing it better than me. So I felt it was a good way to bring those perspectives in and restart a podcast. But then I lost my father in March. And when I lost my father in March, I had to stop everything, every part of my work. He was a big influence in my work as a storyteller. I got his genes in storytelling. And not a single muscle moved in my body, which made me want to get back up and talk about stories, storytelling, get back on stage and perform. So I took my time to live with that grief, to live with that loss, to handle myself, to recover. And so the podcast kept pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. I went back on stage, very imperfect. I've written a lot about it. I've spoken about it at different platforms that I've been on. It still is very difficult to get back on stage and perform because I'm not my 100%. I'm very distracted. I sometimes forget the strain of my story, which is not what I do. I'm unable to improvise. So I'm following the script on most cases right now. I'm more watchful of my audience. And I'm constantly doubting myself when I'm on stage as a performing artist. So that part of my storytelling journey has been very slow. Things which I restarted were writing, again, writing long form. And this podcast, going back and having deep conversations with people who are shaping the world and who sort of restore that faith that stories make our world go round. And there is a place in the world for good storytelling to change people, their lives, and everything in between. So, today, when I wanted to have this conversation, I've been wanting to talk about mental health for a while and how stories and storytelling help you handle your life, its grief, your anxiety, your stress. What makes you get up every day and take that first step? Because we all are living in the middle of a story. We are living a story where we're experiencing things, we're brushing them off, we're moving on, because it happens to everybody. 10 years back, when I transitioned into storytelling and being a performing artist, I moved from television to being a performing artist. And that too was a phase when I went through extreme trauma because I was asked to literally get away from my news organization because I was a new mother. I was asked to step down from my position. My entire identity of being a professional was taken away from me in a snap. And I was left as somebody who had to follow. And I moved back and I realized that if your identity can be taken away by anyone, who are you? What did you work for? That's when storytelling rescued me. So I'm hoping for a miracle even again. Older, 10 years older, I don't want to snap out of this story of my life and say, from tomorrow, I'm not going to feel grief. From tomorrow, I'm not going to feel sad about losing my father. And I'm fine, I'm okay. But I think 10 years later, you sort of understand that we are all living in the middle of a story. It's okay to not want the story to get over very soon. You don't need to rush with it. Take it like a nice step ahead in your life, discovering a little about yourself, a little about the world. So that's a long introduction to my guest today, because I wanted to sort of transition into why am I doing what I'm doing, and I keep talking about it in a lot of my podcasts and a lot of my content on social media. But this particular episode is very close to my heart because we are talking about stories, storytelling, and mental health. And today I have with me Smitha Murthy. Smitha and I have known each other for a while on social media. She was part of the Storied Way conclave that we had a couple of years back when she came in, and MyndStories was her platform. Her platform, MyndStories, was still in the works. It wasn't ready yet,
Yeah.
and she was working on launching it. Um, so for all I know is that MyndStories is India's first inclusive, integrated, diversity friendly storytelling platform to nurture mental health. and it's on a mission to make mental health cool again through conversations, stories, therapy, podcast, and group sessions. Welcome, Smita. Thank you for speaking to me today, and thank you for waiting for this long introduction before you could come on stage. How are you feeling today?
Nervous and anxious because that's how I am before the beginning of any kind of a podcast, whether I'm the one who's hosting it or whether I'm the one who's a guest, which is pretty rare. But I can see why you're a storyteller, Rituparna. I could just have listened to you for hours. And believe me, for somebody like me who's neurodivergent, that takes a lot. So I can see that there's so much of depth in the way you narrate your own stories. And in just the little introduction that you gave itself, I could sense there are so many pieces of my own story that I could immediately connect with. And that is the reason why I believe that stories are so important because, in the end, I think we say this in one of our podcasts as well when we say our stories are us.
Yeah.
And in your story, I can find small pieces of myself. And I have found that it's the same when I narrate pieces of my story. People come up to me and they say, somehow you gave me a voice, that you enabled me to say things that I could not.
Mm.
And that's when I realized how transformative stories can be. We think our stories are so individual, it's just us and it's my own private hell that I'm going through, or my fantastic, joyous life that I'm celebrating. But there's so much more than that. I think stories are the bridge that connect us. It kind of draws the humanity within us and it tells us that, hey, there is that makes us human. And
Yeah.
how do we connect this thread? It's through the stories that we experience. It's the stories that we become and the stories that we narrate. So Mind Stories, when I last spoke to you, was just a concept. It was an idea and it's slowly picking up pace. And my desire is that, like you said, I want to make mental health conversations cool. I want to see
Mm.
how we can start to be more open in talking about the stories that we don't want to share as well. Grief is one such story that nobody talks about.
Oh, yes.
Loss is one such story that we don't want to talk about. Loneliness, these are stories that we don't want to share. But we occupy the stories all the same. They occupy big chapters in our head. So my aim is to see how can we bring these stories to life? How can we just narrate the different chapters of our life that we just want to keep closed? So that's where we are. That's what we're trying to do with Mind Stories.
How lovely. I There's something that I talk about is that we are all living in a story. We all of us, even though we are working and co-working and interacting with one another, living maybe under the same roof, each one of us is living in a story, which is a story of our lives where our own problems, our own struggles, our own epiphanies, our wins are guiding us into being who we are every single day. But there is another story which is running in our mind,
Yeah.
which is the story that we wish we were telling, or the story that we are telling, correcting all the stepping out of the reality of our lives and then manipulating it in some way to tell it in another way, or showcasing it because the world expects you to do it. So whether it is about okay having to deal with loss and then be in a hurry to move on because everybody loses their parent at some point of time. What's the big deal? If you're a young mother, you will lose your career. What's the big deal? And that was the one thing which I got to hear 10 years back over and over again. Oh, it happens to everybody. Oh, it happens to everybody. So why, if it happens to everybody, why are we not talking about it? Why are we not doing something about it? And if everybody goes through grief, again having to live, having given caregiving for so long, why are we not talking about it? So there is the story that we are all living in. There's a story that our mind is telling us, manipulating us, or shaping our behavior and our look towards the world. Could you talk to us about a little about the name of your platform, Mind Stories, and why is it my?
There's a simple reason for that. I actually couldn't get the domain name. So I wish I could give you a more profound philosophical answer, but that was the reality. We wanted to take Mind, and then we realized that that wasn't available, or even if it was available, it was at a insanely high cost of some $12,000 or something, and there was no way I could
Hmm.
afford that. So in the end, we just thought, okay, let's just play around with it a little bit. What about if we make it Mynd? And that was available. So somehow it seemed to fit better because somebody told us at that point of time that it seems to me that you're almost telling me like it's my story as well. right? So it seemed to fit. So it was a happy discovery that we couldn't find the domain name, and an even happier discovery that somehow we seem to have hit the right name, and it seemed to fit with the kind of ethos that we were planning to build as well. That I want this to be a platform where we are able to share the stories that resonate with us, and the stories, like you said, that we don't talk about, right? Like you
Mm.
just mentioned, grief, for example. I remember this time, and a lot of mind stories also came up because I have seen how we don't address grief. And I was about 12 or 13 when my brother died. And I do remember that each one of us handled his death in different ways, but nobody really spoke about it. My mom used to have frequent breakdowns, terrifying migraines after his death, and which required hospitalization. I was a kid and I just kind of shut down completely. My sister, I think, tried to talk about it a little bit, but nobody else was supportive enough. And my dad just kind of shut himself up in his own grief. So, in the end, nobody really spoke. Nobody said, okay, how do we support each other in our grief? We carried these own private story of grief in our heads, and we carried it for way too long because we did not talk about it. I sometimes feel going back to those years, if we had just sort of sat down as a family, held hands perhaps, and said, hey, why don't we talk about this? This is affecting all of us.
Mm.
I somehow feel the trajectory of our lives would have been different. Maybe in that shared circle, we could have found some solace. Instead, we became very isolated in our grief. And it stuck with me for a very long time, that sense of isolation. And I realized while we were building Mind Stories that this is what people grapple with the most. It's not about, let's say, posturing on social media as
Mm.
much as it is about saying, I need to feel heard and I'm going through something in my life that is difficult, and somehow I have to mask it. There are, because everybody else seems to be, like you said, it's not a big deal.
Mm.
It's everybody goes through love, everybody goes through heartbreak, everybody goes through a divorce, everybody goes through parenthood, or not. Uh, and of course, all of us lose somebody we love at some point of time in our life, but that doesn't mean it's not a big deal for you. It doesn't mean that it's not our story to carry. And that's when I felt like I don't want to be uh, the person who's going to hold my own story close to my heart and live this internal hell. I thought, what if I can provide people a platform where even if they can't talk about their own story, at least they can listen to somebody else's story, they can read somebody else's story, and through that feel that sense of support and community that I missed. So that's how we started that, and that's where we are right now. I think we've had more than 250 plus stories right now on the platform, and I think I would just love to expand that even more and get people to share videos, audio snippets, whatever it is, on topics that we really find difficult to talk about. And topics like we mentioned, right? Loneliness, you know, the grief of losing somebody, whether it is through loss such as death, whether it's through a divorce, or whether it's through, let's say, a friendship breakup, all of these things. Grief is so insidious that it just kind of infiltrates into every aspect of your being, and we don't recognize it because we're just supposed to just soldier on, we're just supposed to bear with it, we're just supposed to give it a statutory kind of timeline and say, okay, now I'm done, I'm just going to put on my party hat and just get back to doing things. But like I told you at the beginning of the conversation, these kind of stories that we carry, they kind of sit on our shoulder. And unless we
Mm.
kind of accept and embrace what it is on our shoulders, we're just going to carry a very heavy burden for the rest of our life. So I wanted to make sure that we take these stories, hug them close to our chest, and say, we are here.
How important is it to be heard? I mean, I can just, while you are talking, I can just keep quiet and not interrupt and ask my next question. I would just really like for you to talk. And I noticed that while I was talking, you did the same. So, how important is it that, yes, I'm dealing with a story, this is my life, this is my struggle, but when I'm telling my story, I don't want to be told what to do. I don't want to be guided into, what are the next steps that I should be taken. No advice, no gyan, no bit of hand holding into what am I expecting, when somebody's really telling their story. What are they really expecting at that point?
To tell you personally, I didn't realize until I started therapy, which was about 3 years ago, that that was the first experience I had of somebody really hearing you. Because I've had good friends, I've had supportive friends, but very often the listening comes in the form of advice,
Yeah.
and they care for you, right? So they can't bear to see you in pain, they can't bear to see you suffering. So in a way to assuage themselves, they want to just quickly enable you to just get back on track and to just do whatever they can to stop you from the suffering. Unfortunately, that only prolongs it. So I had found that I didn't know what listening was until I started therapy, because inevitably when I used to listen or I used to share something, I would get advice, I would get some suggestions, or I would probably be invalidated that what I'm feeling is perhaps maybe overly sensitive or maybe not quite appropriate or maybe something or the other. This feeling of genuinely being held, where you just have somebody with you who is just offering their presence, that was something very new to me. And that is something that I learned from my therapist. And I discovered that there's such warmth in this, and such such reassurance when somebody is just there to hold your story. It doesn't matter. It's just validation. They're not offering you the judgment of saying maybe you shouldn't feel this. They're not offering you suggestions to fix you. They're not offering you anything but just comfort. And I realized that that is probably what I've been missing for so long in my life. Just this presence, just to have somebody hear you and just to say that I hear you, I feel you, right? So I realized that this is probably the single most important thing for me ever since I started going to therapy, and probably the most important thing for me in my closest relationships as well. These days, I'm learning to tell people I'm not asking for suggestions. I'm just going to come and tell you my story. I'm just going to tell you something about myself. Please just listen. And they, when you tell them that, they do get it and they just listen. And then you feel so much more lighter. You feel like some part of your story is connected with the other person. And that
Yeah.
starts your process of healing. And isn't that what stories do to us, Ritu? They're
Abs-
supposed to just take you on this path where you feel connected, and that's when you realize that somewhere those small little broken pieces in our heart just start to come together a little bit. Not in a dramatic way, but every time somebody really listens to you, every time somebody offers you that ear where they just say, I feel you, I hear you, I think parts of ourselves just get restored. So for me, I think the power of storytelling is not just in the way we narrate our stories, but also in the way we receive the stories that we are told.
yeah.
And that's where it becomes a beautiful two-way conversation where stories are the bridge and we are the connectors.
Yeah. In my work, Smita, I've had these very powerful experiences where I've narrated stories, and the stories are not meant to make you cry and weep, but they do make the listeners cry and weep. And very surprisingly, stories where there are children as characters. Yes, there's an adult character as well, but I've had adults sitting and weeping during that story. Children haven't. Never. Children have never wept in my stories, thankfully, which is a good thing. They've never been so touched. They felt scared, but yes, that's because I'm making them feel that fear in the middle of a story, but not push to the brink where they surrender to that emotion and they weep and they can't handle it. But adults, I've had so many experiences where I've had adults cry. And the first time it ever happened to me, no, it was the second time it happened to me. It was a parent, and I was in a show, and there were children who were doing lots of interesting things, and I could see that the parent is crying at the end. When she came to speak to me, I told her that I'm so sorry I made you cry, and she held my hand and she hugged me after that. She said, "Thank you for making me cry." uh, I've seen that, sometimes a story becomes cathartic, like the way we read a book, we watch a film, you watch a story sort of, and a storyteller, if it is in flesh and blood, gives you somewhere that confidence to be you while experiencing that story. And for me, as a storyteller, that's my biggest ask or need or want, or my, let's say, my most important objective when I'm telling a story as a performing artist, which is to create a safe space for people to emote and express. First, feel enough, safe enough to feel things which they want to feel, and then feel even safer to express it through their bodily actions, through their speech, through their thoughts, through their, interactions with their peers or with their family, whoever's sitting there. So feel safe enough. So storytelling, when it creates that safe space for for us to be, it sort of makes us, do something, and in your on your platform, help me understand that you said that you're creating spaces, you're creating content, you're writing stories, you have your podcast, you also have group sessions where people come and talk or even hear. So take us through some of that experience. What kind of safe space are you creating through storytelling, so that someone can just be without even, like, let's say, I don't want to hear, I don't want to speak, I'm not ready to speak at this point, but I want to hear. And by listening, you know what does it do for me? So can you explain that?
Yeah, you know, the example that you just gave was somebody who was crying after listening to one of your stories. I could relate to that quite a bit because I have struggled with crying, right? Uh, and it's something that I discuss a lot in therapy as well. And I told my therapist, "Oh, well, you're going to get your doctorate in psychology the day you get me to cry in front of you." And this is something that sounds very bizarre to people. Like,
Yeah.
I find people are able to just cry in front of somebody else, and I find that so vulnerable. And here I am, I'm just this block of ice, and I can't seem to cry. But tell me a good story, and I cry.
Mm.
Show me a good movie, and I cry. I have sobbed. I think it was 12 Years a Slave, and I was watching it with my closest friend, and there was this scene where this 12-year-old black girl is brutally beaten because she just wanted to have a little bit of soap to wash herself. And I don't know what it broke inside me. I just started sobbing. And I remember my friend, who, by the way, is perfectly okay with crying in front of others, but is kind of like okay with not crying in front of movies, turned to me in astonishment and said, "What on earth is happening to you?" And I said, "She just wanted a piece of soap. Just wanted a piece of soap." But I just couldn't stop crying. It just seemed like a dam had just burst, and all she could do was just hold me while I cried over this fictional character in a fictional movie. But that's what stories can do to us, right?
Mm.
And I read a good story in a book and I can cry. I watch a trailer and I can cry. But ask me to narrate the stories of my life and something else happens to me. So there is something so cathartic when you actually listen to something which is pulling emotions out of you. And I have found that identification through the stories I listen to, or whether I hear it in a podcast, or whether I watch it in a movie. And you mentioned how sometimes people may not want to participate in a story, but they're still part of it. And I say this because very often when I write on LinkedIn, I narrate a lot of my personal experiences and stories. And I find strange people reach out to me on DM, and
Mm.
I said, they said, "I've been watching you for a long time, and this particular post of yours really touched me." And they have never reacted to my post, Ritu. They have done nothing. I wouldn't even be aware of their existence. And then they say, "I've been following you for 2 years. I've followed every single post of yours." Not a reaction, not a comment, but they're there. They are participants in my story, and somehow they felt connected, even though they probably will never react. They'll never say anything. It took a lot of probably courage for them to just come and say
Yeah.
on a DM that this is something that touched me. And the spaces that we are creating are for those people. I'm an introvert, and uh, storytelling comes naturally to me because I have no other outlet. And I find that somehow when I express myself, I'm able to do this better than I do with people, right? So writing is a source of putting down in words what I cannot express to other people. So I find
Mm.
it a release. And in that release, other people seem to find their voice. So the spaces that I wanted to create would be something where even the introverts, even the ones who don't want to talk, even the ones who are all carrying stories in them, but they're not able to share, can just participate. So we are having, and my idea is to have more such events like this. One of the group sessions that we have is simply to just meet. So far, we are doing that in Bangalore, but I'd love to have this go and spread out in more cities, maybe in Mumbai or Pune or Chennai, or wherever we can think of. And the whole idea is to just meet and talk. And if you don't want to talk, just be there. And I have found that people just come. They don't say
Mm.
anything, but they're there. And the conversations that we have are typically small prompts that we pick up, such as maybe memories, such as maybe your childhood, or that might be a little bit difficult for people to talk about, but uh, vulnerabilities, things that move you, right? So these are things that I wish we could have more conversations about, and I find that for these conversations, people show up.
Yeah.
Very often they don't say anything, they expect me to say everything, but that's okay. I still feel they're part of my story, and in some way, we are supporting them tell their own story, perhaps not aloud, but to themselves, right? So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to make this as accessible a platform as I could to a lot of people, to the people who often don't come out there and have a loud voice on social media, but they're still very much a part of us. So
Mm.
these spaces are similar to that. Even there's a proposed book reading club that we wanted to have, and it might sound a bit funny. Why are we having books and mental health together? But again, goes back to stories, books,
Mhm.
mental
Yeah.
health. I mean, I cannot
Yeah.
think of a better combination than that. And I realized that again, when it comes to books, people who may not read might feel excluded, but they still can participate in a good story. They still love reading some words. They love a quote or two. Why are we
Yeah.
excluding them by saying, read this book and come and let's talk
Mm,
about
yeah.
this?
Let's
Right.
read it
So
here while we are here.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
that's
let's just
fine.
have a gathering where
Mm.
we just discuss anything that we love. Maybe it's a good
Mm.
story, maybe it's a nice quote, maybe it's just about a love for books or for a
Yeah.
good story. So these are the kind of spaces that I would like to create. And even in the podcast, I think we've combined storytelling, we've combined conversations with people, and we also
Hmm.
combine music as well. So whatever can appeal to people in the places that they are touched the most, I think that's where we can benefit. And in all of these, I think what's common to me and what has struck out is that you never know who's listening in. You never know
Oh,
who's
yes.
reading you, and you never know who's actually being inspired by you.
I say this all the time. You've taken the words out of my mouth, which is tell your story. You never know who needs it in the world. And most of often, tell your story for yourself. Because today, the world of social media is about okay, who's my audience? What do they want to hear? I am becoming something for them so that they can
Yeah.
engage with me. And like you said, you are there on LinkedIn writing your story, and there is somebody who's reading every bit post of yours, and you never know what are they getting out of it. I've had these out of body experiences with people where they've come and said the same thing to me, that Rituparna, I have read every word you've written, I've watched every video, I have heard every story that you've put out, and they will quote it back to you in with the comma, with the parenthesis and the quotation marks, which is like, oh my god, you really are everything, but you never know what are they looking for, what are they searching for. So sometimes, and that process is right, it perhaps has to begin with ourselves, not for the other immediately, that okay, now I will start telling my story in a way. You mentioned something about your personal, you're creating spaces for people to come and share their personal stories. You just mentioned about a book club. uh, so, what form of stories are you working with? Are you talking with personal stories? So that's non-fiction. You're working with fiction. Are you working with cultural stories? Stories which maybe they have heard over a period of time, and therefore they become part of their cultural understanding of what it takes to be a man, what it takes to be a woman. So when they respond to such stories, a lot of these hidden, unsaid parts of people's personalities, or where there are things about, let's say, handling different responses, they are all locked in and you never know how do I respond to this, and now I feel uncomfortable talking about it. So what form of stories are you using?
Well, I would say a mix of both fiction and non-fiction, right?
Mhm.
So one of the reasons why we started this was, of course, to make people's voices heard, right? For them to feel that somebody is out there listening to the stories. And I found that when it comes to mental health, funnily enough, although there is a lot of stigma, there are also a lot of people who want to come and talk.
Mm-hmm.
And we found that there are a fair number of people who want to write first person essays, narrate the stories of what it is perhaps to be neurodivergent, whether they're going through a mental health illness at that point of time, whether it is living with bipolar, whether it's living with borderline personality disorder, or anything that they feel is misunderstood. And I feel like I have to tell this. I want to make sure that and the single most important thing that they come and say is, nobody understands me,
Mm.
and I would like to just make sure that somebody understands somebody else through my story. And it might sound a little weird when I put it like that, but that is what I have found. First
Mm-hmm.
person essays, people just genuinely want to come out there, share their stories. I've also found that through the audio podcast that we have as well, we intended to start this as short snippets of people's lives, and how do we all cope with what we call as the ordinary or the extraordinary stresses of life, right? Like we
Mm.
discussed at the beginning, people say everybody has gone through this. Yes, the human experience is universal. Loss, grief, joy, pain, suffering, it's universal. There is nobody who can, say that I haven't gone through something. So in that sense, we wanted to have those podcasts where people tell us, how do I cope with grief? How do I cope with loss? How do I cope with stress? How do I cope with living with, say, bipolar? How do I cope with, which is not, let me not just say how do I cope? How do I find hope, right? What are the ways in which I find resilience? And I thought through establishing a thread of different people narrating their own life experiences, we can somehow connect people with this shared narrative and
Mm.
bring to life the common thread that unites us, right? So I have found that throughout all of it, most people do say hold on to that hope.
Mm.
People do say that grief never goes away, but it's going to get slightly better with time. I have found that people say that their ways of coping might involve something as simple as sleeping well, to probably just going for long walks, or probably just exercising. For some other people, it could be listening to a story. So there are so many different ways in which people heal, so many different ways in which people cope. And for me, it's fascinating to find these ways.
Mm.
And also, the third part that you mentioned, where do we find commonalities in our shared cultural histories, for example? So, we started our storytelling podcast with a special focus on children's stories because I have this love for children's literature. I think there's so much that we as adults can take away from
Oh,
children's
yes.
books. The meaning. I was a late entrant to reading children's books. I mean, I spent a lot of time as a child reading Enid Blyton, but it was a different experience to come back and recognize that there's more to life than Enid Blyton, and there's this wonderful plethora of books where you learn about the smaller things of life: being kind, being compassionate, holding space for somebody else, fighting for your values or for your friend, and just coping with this beautiful, diverse world that we have. So we started with using those cultural narratives through audio podcasts. So we used to have a lot of these storytelling podcasts as well. So it's a mix of both. My dream is to also create something like an audio drama again, so that they can extend on forever and probably have like 3 series of
Mm-hmm.
audio dramas where we combine so many elements of a good story and keep people engaged for longer than say even 40 or 50 minutes as we do right now. So if you ask me, in a nutshell, yes, both people's stories and the lives that we make up as well. I think in a way they're all connected, right? So it helps to kind of form a compendium as to where we are and how we derive comfort.
The Storied Way perspective is designed and developed by your Storybag Podcasting Network. Podcasting is a fantastic medium that brings listeners to gather around a story. As the podcasting industry grows by leaps and bounds, we at Your Storybag want to help storytellers, businesses, brands, and organizations leverage the power of narrative. We are not an agency. Instead, you can imagine us as a collective or a cohort that incubates and nurtures emerging story based podcasts in the airwaves. If you'd like to collaborate, commission, or create your own story based podcast, reach out to us at podcast@yourstorybag.com. Did you watch that episode of Modern Love where Andrew Garfield reads an essay and he breaks down? I
No,
watched it. Oh my God. Oh, you have to watch it. So, Modern Love, which is a New York Times column, they featured Andrew Garfield. He had a film coming out, and he's also been living with grief of having lost his mother.
Mhm.
And he talks about it in other platforms as well. But around the promotion of his film, he was on the podcast, and Modern Love is a column of personal essays. And he picked up, he was given a couple of columns to choose, a couple of essays to choose from. He picked one up. So he had read it before. He knew what it was all about. But while reading it on the podcast, he started weeping. And it's such a powerful thing. It is, I mean, he's an actor. He gets paid to cry. But you don't see him do that. You see him surrender to this essay, which he has read, reread many times before, perhaps before coming to this, at least because he selected it. And something happens while he's reading somebody else's story. When I watched it, I realized that that's what happens to us when we are watching a film, but we are silent. But verbalizing somebody else's story while reading it aloud does something to you, to your own senses, even what you're going through, and you don't know what you're comprehending. So, like that example of a little soap that you talked about from the film. But there is a response that our body makes of whatever we are feeling at that point of time, or what we've been trying to hide or cover up, and sometimes that needs to be uh, come out. My question to you is that, do you think, or based on the interactions that you've had with people physically or virtually, do you think people open up to strangers with their personal stories easily than to their own people?
I have found personally I open up to strangers more than friends. I don't know why, but perhaps it's the immediate comfort of just knowing that hey, they don't know the rest of you, they don't know your life story, and probably this is just going to be momentary, and it's the moment is right, the circumstances are okay, and you just find yourself telling things that you probably wouldn't tell your best friend. It's happened to me. And I have found that when I get on most of my podcasts, I typically don't know them. I don't even have an introductory call, much like how you and I also did not speak before this. And it's for all intents and purposes, I'm just meeting a stranger online. Sure, I
Mm-hmm.
might have interacted with them in a couple of comments or so. I've known them probably on social media, but I don't know anything about them. I don't know if they're married or single or divorced or are living with their parents or whether they have a great job or nothing apart from the carefully curated social media presence. And so I'm out there and I'm trying to get people to share their deepest vulnerabilities. And initially, I was terrified. I said, how on earth am I going to do this? How can I just go out there and ask people to just tell me things which I probably wouldn't want to tell anybody else? And then I found that it did not matter. Though people were able to narrate, people were able to tell. It's almost like uh, given a platform, people talk.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't just about, say, going out there on stage and narrating a fake story. People were really willing to share. Through all my conversations, I have found that it doesn't matter if I ask the deepest, most personal, intimate questions, they don't shy away. They've answered it honestly and truthfully and to the most beautiful vulnerability. And each time I have one of these podcast conversations, I think I go back feeling like I have taken a little bit of that person's story with me. And there's so much that we can learn from each other. I think that's why we have movements like the Humans of
Yeah.
Bombay, which is like so huge. And then we also have, I think, the human libraries where people actually meet just to listen to one person's story. I think that's one movement that I've seen in Bangalore at least, and broader movements which I think originated in New York, where again people just get on stage and they narrate their life stories.
The
So there
moth.
is, yes, the moth. Yes, that's the one. So I read the book and I was fascinated by that, although I haven't actually seen the episodes or the performances. To call it performance
They
makes it
aren't,
seem like
yeah,
it's
they
staged.
no, they aren't. In fact, that's the good thing about I have been
Yeah,
a long follower of the Moth, and I listen to every episode that they put out on their podcast,
yeah,
read their books. And I know they are not performances, yes, but they are
yeah,
true stories which somebody guides them into putting them into
true.
the right words so
Yeah,
that there is something for the listener as well. There's the other thing, which is about story cores. Have you heard of story cores?
no, no.
Okay, so that's another platform which allows you to have conversations with people. So it could be two friends sitting and chatting. It could be, a intergenerational conversation. It could be people from different backgrounds or different beliefs, political beliefs, who decide to sit down and have a conversation instead of fighting and going against each other on the streets. So the power of a conversation and a personal story. The moment you know somebody's personal story, you sort of feel closer to that one, and it allows you to bridge what you feel about yourself, about them, about the relationship that you've had. And these conversations are recorded and they are preserved at the Library of Congress, so that anybody can go back and listen to that conversation. I think conversations are very, very powerful. Have you facilitated conversations between people or use them to share their stories with one another? Just out of curiosity, imagine a third person sitting and listening to us talk.
That
Uh,
sounds like a delicious thing to do, actually. I haven't actually thought about it, but I think now that you tell me, I think that's a future thing that we should start immediately. Because I have
yes.
found that, like I said, I go back feeling incredibly privileged that people share so much with me.
Yeah.
And they're kind enough to say that sometimes it's because you are asking me the right questions, but I'm genuinely curious about people.
Mm,
And I genuinely believe that a lot of my own supposed strength, or I should say, my way of coping with life has been enhanced because somewhere down the line, something that somebody else has said has stuck with me. Like for example, I think in one of my podcasts, this very popular LinkedIn creator, he told me something about to find the something similar to saying finding the order in disorder
mm,
and to find the calm in chaos. And I found that so narratable and so relatable in a way that you could say, hey, we are always in the middle of chaos, but can I find the calm in the middle of the chaos? And that struck me as something that I can carry with me because typically I just get overwhelmed pretty fast. Like life happens to me and a bunch of five things happen in any particular day, and you're just out of battery. But then I can find that there's a centering that you can take in the midst of the chaos and you can find a little bit of calm. So, um, to answer that question, no, but I would love to try it. And
mm,
second, I think there is a lot of power in people just telling about their own lives and the ways in which we can take their narration and kind of weave it into our own stories. So just like this line is never going to leave me finding the calming chaos or the
mm,
order and disorder. um, these are important things which help me to recognize this duality of life, and more than the duality of the binary. So there's so much more that we're living in a spectrum, and it's while it's very easy to weigh on one scale, that it's also possible to find that you can be kind of happy and sad at the same time. And I found that was the biggest learning for me, honestly, this year,
mm,
because you seem like you're always leaning towards the sadness, but I found that it's possible within those moments of sadness to find that odd moment where you just look out of your window and you see this bird chirping and you just find the calm. So it's one line from
mm,
one person who I cannot remotely say is my good friend or anybody, but that's the power of telling a story. It somehow strikes somebody else somewhere and they hold on to it for a long time. So we never know what we have narrated here. This conversation that we've had here might probably positively impact somebody else. And that's the hope that I live with.
mm,
There was this time recently where I told myself I'm going to go off LinkedIn. So I just went off. I was pretty bothered. buy things on social media and on LinkedIn, and I just said, okay, I'm just going to put my profile in hibernation, and just went off. And I think I was off for about 3, 4 days before people actually noticed. And some of them who noticed, who also had my phone number, started to reach out to me asking, "Are you okay? Is there anything?" Because I tried to search for your post and they didn't show up. And then I tried to search for your profile and it wasn't there. So I just wanted to know if you're okay and that, we miss you. And then somebody else said, "Why are you off LinkedIn?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I have this reason why I'm not there." And they said, you know, uh, while I appreciate you taking the time off, do recognize that possibly somewhere your words mean something to somebody else.
Hmm.
So come back if you can for the people who find your words to be of some meaning to them. And I honestly hadn't thought so much when I was writing on LinkedIn. I thought it was an outlet for myself. And when people tell you that even the tiniest action of yours that you perform so unconsciously is having some huge impact somewhere else, it kind of makes you feel like maybe your life is a little bit more meaningful. So, in narrating my own stories, I have found that uh, my meaning comes not from validation in terms of the followers or the number of people who listen to a podcast or uh, the traffic or the analytics or all these numbers. I think my validation comes from feeling that my stories have a space and that space is of importance to somebody else, even if it's just one person. And as long as that space exists, I shall continue to tell my story.
Lots of interesting intersections of ideas and questions come to my mind while listening to you. So, on one hand, there is the stigma to mental health, right? So,
Yeah.
we know that it's not easy to go ahead and tell your story because what will somebody think if today your primary objective is to talk about mental health on social media and you run a platform, so you are talking about mental health. But tomorrow, if you are, let's say, a job seeker, and today you're talking about your mental health on social media on LinkedIn, and tomorrow you're the hiring manager or somebody decides, "Well, let's go and see what does this person write on LinkedIn today, or what is it that person like on social media," and they suddenly see you talking about all kinds of things, and that could go against you. The other way around is also, I mean, while this, I'll place that situation here in one corner. The other is, of course, the other bit that because we want validation, because we want to be seen, we want to be heard, we want people to subscribe, follow, listen. And suddenly we sort of peddling our story. Peddling, I use the word peddling very carefully because that's the only thing I have to peddle right now. So now I'm going to talk about my mental health and I'm going to make it about my mental health, or I'm going to talk about this because, oh, I've noticed when we talk about mental health, people start noticing me, or it, I may not be dealing with it right now, but it's very productive to keep talking about it. So there is this other thing. And the third is, of course, there is nothing else to talk about in my life other than this, and that's it. I will keep talking about it. So you see, so while social media is making you become someone or something else, there is also this element of who do I know, how do I use my story effectively, for what purpose, what is my objective. So there are all kinds of people, and the ones who are shying away from telling their story could be actually watching all of this and saying that, look here, it is not easy because you will not be hired if you talk about this all the time, because I need to be hired, and you've made it your, your badge of honor, you made it your, let's say, the flag that you will keep moving, but it's not easy for me to do it. So social media is such a confusing place. How do you deal with, because our stories are then triggering other people's stories, isn't it? It's not easy to be who you are. I mean how what's your response to that?
To answer the first question, I actually realized that I don't write because I have a mental health platform. I just write because it serves as a way for me to process things that are happening in my life. And somehow, because as I said earlier at the beginning of this conversation, I find that I'm not very comfortable with speaking and directly expressing things. Writing is my first outlet. Sometimes I think I should tell my therapist, I'll just write letters to you. Let's not have conversations, That's
Some,
probably,
somebody should think of that too. Writing as a form of healing, it's tremendously powerful. And even those who cannot write should write. Yes, go on.
yeah.
Writing.
So, I probably think I should just, instead of joining on a session, I'll just send her a long letter and say, okay, can we just, have this conversation around the letter, and you send me a letter back. So why even speak at all? But yeah, so to just tell you, I write because I find that it gives me a certain control over my emotions. It helps me process things better. And writing is a very retrospective kind of an activity, and it kind of forces you to look back and introspect. And I think most of us writers are deeply self-absorbed in any case. We're lost in our own world, and our own inner world. So it helps to just take it out and just keep it out there, right? So for somebody else to suffer in a way. But I write for that. But I also recognize that there are these difficulties when people use social media, they use mental health for their own personal benefit in ways that may not exactly benefit the movement. And there is the stigma, and whatever we do, it exists. I do know of people who have come on the podcast to say, please don't mention my company in the show notes. And I used to find it a bit strange because they were coming there and they're being open and talking about, say, um, one person was talking about, having bipolar disorder, but they did not want to have the company anywhere mentioned. I should not even refer to them in the intro, which goes to show that they are probably afraid of the
Yeah.
repercussions if the people around them know that they have bipolar disorder. So I do feel for them that we are in a society where we somehow feel that those who have any kind of a mental health issue are somehow incapable of functioning in the ways we define society should function, or people should function, or employees should be productive in so and so way. And yes, there is a fallout. There's also this fallout, as you mentioned, where influencers tend to get on the mental health bandwagon and just say, huh, I'm done posting selfies or talking about myself. I'm just going to talk about this deep, dark depression that I'm definitely not going through. Right. So because it's trendy, because it's I think right now in India, $12 billion industry. So,
Mhm.
the more people talk about mental health
Yeah.
thing, the better it is for awareness. But I do get concerned as to what the people are talking about. We see casual terms being thrown around.
Yeah.
Um, People who have a little understanding will just say, "Hey, I have ADHD, or I have OCD simply because I like to have my kitchen shelves arranged in a certain way," or probably everybody's toxic, or
And that
everything is
makes me an
toxic.
expert to talk about it. That makes me an expert so
Yes,
I can start talking
yes,
about it. Yeah.
yes. So I do fear for that the actual lived experiences may somehow get diluted in that process. But I still come around to feeling that somehow, given how tightly regulated mental health is in India, and
Mm.
how, by regulated, I mean almost censored internally by society, not by the government, that any talk is still better than no talk at all. So,
Mm.
although there is harm in terms of the ways people are talking about mental health, without actually having lived experience of it or being professionals in that field, I still feel that opening up more conversations is the first step. Then filtering out the real conversations from the not so real conversations would be the next step. So I would rather have more conversations than less. And I would rather have a society that talks about mental health in any manner, and to utilize whatever we can to bring these conversations out into the open. So I'm more for that rather than restricting that. It's difficult to police that, and I do not for an instant doubt that there'll be more such influencers who will be talking things that they don't know about. But I will say it's just a burden that we have to bear. And
Mm.
in fact, at Mind Stories also, I have this thing where I tell people, if you're going to write a first person essay, you're not going to get paid. And it sounds a bit weird, like, are you exploiting them? But it came from the perspective that I did not want to make first person essays paid, because then I
Yeah.
was worried that people will write to get paid.
Yeah.
And I did not want that to happen. I wanted people who will just genuinely come and say, I just so want to write, and I so want to tell my story that I don't care if you pay me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's kind of like one small little rule that we have. And to be honest, a lot of writers, they don't write once I tell them they're not going to get paid. So I do not know how authentic those stories would have been,
Yeah.
but that's one step that we're trying to take to ensure that the good stories really make it out there. And well, I hope that people generally are able to see the real. We tend to underestimate ourselves many times, but I do
Mm.
feel that we know what is authentic in front of us more than we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah. So
And
I always
that which is authentic will come true.
I always say this, that when we are, there is doom scrolling and there is positive scrolling. So scroll and find a story which sort of looks authentic to you. But what is the test of authenticity? You've just heard it, that at least on Mind Stories, you will get stories which are authentic and are real and not made believe, and which are manipulative, which is going to make you feel something just because it's something that, okay, somebody's being paid to write. You also do workshops with corporates and business houses. So, and while you mentioned that, I was also listening to this particular podcast about on a person who's neurodivergent, and he calls up a couple of podcast producers, I mean hosts, who are experts in organizational behavior and culture and all of that. And they asked that, and that the caller asked that, I am neurodivergent, and at what point in my interview should I tell them that I am what I am and I've been diagnosed? So, that was the conversation, and that made me sort of again connect to what you do, is that sometimes the onus of telling their story, you know is on the person who has a certain condition, or the person who identifies being, let's say, neurodivergent in this case, is on that person. It is not on the other people who may have to work with colleagues who are neurodivergent. So, for organizations which are looking at creating inclusive workplaces, do you see your platform helping them to learn about the different narratives of people, and understand that what makes a person unique, and how can we work with people who are not typical in the way we behave and think and react? So do you see Mind Stories helping them understand the stories of different people?
I would love to, because I think neurodivergence is probably the most misunderstood term right now.
Yeah, yeah.
And I have seen that personally, because I keep talking about the fact that I'm neurodivergent, but I didn't realize until recently that people have the weirdest ideas about this. I kid you not, somebody actually thought I'm gonna just jump up into some kind of a crazy dance because I'm neurodivergent. And I'm not, genuinely not joking about this. So I realized that yes, when we have corporates, they are geared towards neurotypical environment. And I do not know how I might function now, but for the longest time when I was in the corporate world, I struggled with things like a harsh lighting. And
Hmm.
I never knew about it because my diagnosis of neurodivergence was just last year. So I have lived with feeling extreme discomfort. I would run around trying to ask my managers, can you just find me a place that's away from the lights? And most of these corporates, offices have this harsh fluorescent lights which are like literally on your face, and it is hell for somebody who's neurodivergent. And noises, right? So I always used to have headphones, noise canceling headphones. And people used to, I realized that people thought I'm being very snobbish when I do that, that I'm somehow not accessible, because at a workplace, you're just supposed to smile and just generally be chirpy and talk to everybody. But here I am with my headphones on, pretty much similar to what you have. And I'm in this little corner where there are no lights. I do not know what people would imagine. But at this point of time, can I just go take
Yeah, yeah,
this
sure,
thing?
sure, of
I'm just
course.
so
Yeah, yeah,
sorry
yeah,
about
yeah.
this.
No worries, no worries.
Yeah, there are a
Mm.
couple of people you can't avoid in life. And I guess Amazon delivery people are one of those. So I'm so sorry about that.
No
Yeah.
worries, no worries.
So to just pick up from where I left, and I found that corporates are really struggling with that. So can we help them? Yes. One, in terms of actual awareness campaigns as to what neurodivergence is, to break through this. I mean, if mental health has a stigma, I think neurodivergence has an even larger way to go. And how can we actually build systems and policies in place that would make somebody who's neurodivergent comfortable? And we're
Hmm.
not built that way. And I'm not even sure if we're able to accommodate employees in that way. Partly because our interview processes itself are discriminatory right from the beginning. For example, if I were to go for an interview tomorrow, I might fidget a lot. I might want to just move around. I might just have some nervous movements. It does not mean I lack confidence. It just means I have difficulty. Somebody who's perhaps autistic might be stimming, right? Which is a repetitive movement that just gives them comfort. Again, it does not mean they're not capable of that job. It just means that this is the way they're soothing the nervous system. If you see me during this conversation, I have fiddled with my mouse quite a few times, but I have paid complete attention to you, right? So these are ways in which we can set in place environments which make it comfortable. How do we what are the terms in our recruitment? How do we actually approach somebody who's neurodivergent? But of course, um, as you rightly said, that requires you to first have the onus on the person who's neurodivergent to come up and say I'm neurodivergent. But I would say take that step so that they don't have to come and tell you. Be inclusive in your policies, be inclusive in your in the interviews that you take, be inclusive in the hiring policies, in the way your selection criteria itself is constructed, so that you don't judge people just because they're fidgeting or because they haven't looked at you while they're talking, or any of these mannerisms that we think are indications of a person's capabilities. And how are we structuring our office environments as well, right? So that is a little bit more of planning, but I would say let's start with awareness first, and then start to implement gradual policies that can make it easy. So yes, like definitely there's a lot of work to be done. For my case, I would say workshops help, awareness campaigns help, and making the smallest changes will help.
Mm.
And more than anything, I think the stigma has to go that somebody who's neurodivergent is just not going to be as good as a person who's neurotypical.
Yeah, yeah. I
So
think
we sadly
being
do have that.
aware, I think policies help organizations create productive, or let's say inclusive workspaces, but also it's up to individuals to go and seek and understand something that we don't understand. So
Yeah.
whether it is to do with, your identity, which gender do you identify with, your sexuality, whether I don't understand, I identify as a woman, so that's it, that's all I understand. So but it is important for me to understand the many ways people describe themselves, so that if I have to work with a colleague who is doesn't fit into the binaries, I know how to behave, what to say, how to react, without feeling triggered, without feeling that okay, I'm going to say something very stupid which I think is right, but it's up to you to figure it out. So I think I think the awareness should be on the person who sees themselves in a position that I may be working with a neurodivergent colleague, and it's not for my neurodivergent colleague to come and tell me that this is how I want to be treated. It's up to me to be aware. It's like if you have a child who is disabled, you will have to figure it out yourself. Your child will not tell you how to behave with them, right? So though it's the parenting analogy is not the same, but yet sometimes that person is not in a position to explain, so you have to do that yourself. My last question to you is Mind Stories, which what is your target audience right now? Who are the people who should come to that platform? And do you see yourself expanding to different age groups, because mental health is a concern for everyone? And as a storyteller, I work a lot with children, and you rightly said children's stories are extremely aware. Writers are talking about mental health within the children ecosystem as in terms of content, but there is a huge need for attention to children and their mental health, demographics, different languages. What's your plan? So first, take us through who's your platform for, who should go and read and interact with, and what's your future plan?
I would, like you rightly said, Ritu, I think mental health is for everybody, right? So
Mhm.
sometimes when I find this, question in pitch decks or something, I'm genuinely stuck because I'm like, how do I even restrict an audience to something which affects all of us, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I would probably say it's the age group between, say, 24 to about maybe 44, 45, which is the
Mhm.
most aware. I would say right now in terms of mental health and what they're planning to do. Gen Z is incredibly aware.
Mhm.
And I do believe that the current uh, teenagers or people who are young adults who might be in the age group of, say, 13 to about 21, I think their awareness of what mental health is, the ways in which they're taking care of themselves is far more than what I ever had when I was that age. And going forward, that is the age group which I think will change the mental health landscape in India. And the the more they kind of fight against obscure practices of productivity or metrics that we have defined ourselves by for centuries and decades, the more I feel that we'll see change come through, and they're more open to talking about things. They're more there's less of, I would say, stigma around mental health in this particular generation. So that's where I would like to see the platform grow into, to have the people who are younger kind of take the lead in leading this movement, as I would like to call it and as I would like to imagine it. But as of now, I would also see it's the ones who grew up confused in a world that did not acknowledge mental health, the ones who were probably, I don't want to put these baby boomers or millennials kind of tags, but the ones who have struggled with expressing themselves and finding outlets, the ones who did not know what therapy was and who might still be hesitant to seek out therapy, it's for them.
Yeah.
So that's where I'd like to kind of offer a space for them. And, as we grow, I have this vision of having this as an ecosystem, as where people can find anything that they want to for mental health, whether it is just reading a story and comforting themselves, whether it's joining a shared group and just being a quiet participant or an active participant, whether it is actually taking therapy services, whether it's buying a small little journal because somebody told them writing is good for their mental health. So, or maybe just joining a book club and just discussing the love of reading. That's how I see this, as something that I would like for myself. So these are the things that I do for my own mental health. If I feel upset about something, I pick up a book or I watch a good movie. More likely that I would just pick up a book. If I feel even more upset, I have somebody I turn to, and I connect, I talk to people. Even if I'm not upset, I still find that social connections, even the micro social connections, are so meaningful. This
Mm.
conversation with you will probably light up the rest of my day. It keeps me going, even though I'm not a very people person, as I like to call, and I'm not, as I told you at the beginning, I'm pretty much an introvert, so I get people out very quickly. But I still need people, I still need connections, I still need conversations, and I try to implement them in my life. So this is part of what I call as a connective session. And whether I need therapy, yes, I go for regular therapy sessions. I have one scheduled tomorrow. So do I have a journal? Probably not, but I do like writing. So these are the different ways in which I have implemented small things to take care of my own mental well-being. And that's the sort of practice I would like to give out as well as we grow, to see if what works for me can also work for you. And I have a feeling that it might.
Of course it will. Of course it will. I've always believed that storytelling is a wonderful way to heal yourself and heal the world, because it works in two ways. One is it allows you to dwell on your story, to ponder upon it, to open it up brick by brick, layer by layer, revisit it, recreate it, to see it from, like I say, like the lizard on the wall moment, like you become the lizard on the wall and observe your own story from another perspective, and it gives you far more clarity. It helps you understand your knots, the wounds or the scars that you gathered in that moment, and it helps you be more kind to yourself, uh, gives you more perspective to understand how that incident shaped me. It also allows you the tools to move on from that moment and appreciate or carry the scars in a more healthy way. That it's okay. I had a tumble, I had a fall, I have some scars, but that doesn't make me the person I am today. I am more than, I moved on from that moment in my life. Stories also help you find a community, because in the humdrum of our everyday life, we are moving from one day to the other, one incident to the other. But something that helps you lean into somebody else, or offer a shoulder, or offer a listening ear, most importantly, a listening ear, because that's what we all need. Someday you want to be heard, someday you want to hear someone. So that's where it sort of helps you create a community and makes you not feel all alone and the only person who thinks and feels in a certain way. And therefore, we need places and spaces like Mind Stories, where I have all kinds of people I go party with, people I go eat with, but people I hang out with because they stimulate me enough to feel recharged, to feel comfortable with being who I am. I think that's what Mind Stories is creating, and that's what I think you will be doing, right?
I hope so. I hope so. That's
Yeah,
the idea. There's something in what you said when you said that we just want to feel less alone,
yeah,
and I think stories make us feel that we're not alone because um, in everybody else's story, we find pieces of our own.
yeah,
So when you do that, I feel somehow that little piece of aloneness kind of drifts away, and you find connection. When you
yeah.
find connection, you find warmth. I mean, you find warmth, you find healing. So yeah,
Absolutely,
hope to do that.
absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Smita. It was a wonderful conversation, and this is going to stay with me today too for the rest of the day. And I think as
Of
I
course.
continue to edit and put this out together, I think our conversation is beautiful. And thank you so much for taking time out. Hi, this is Rituparna. Thank you for listening to the Storied Way Perspective. This is a bi monthly podcast where you will meet storytellers, influencers, entrepreneurs, coaches, thought leaders, and experts as I ask them what can stories do in the world today. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and everywhere else. Look out for the Storied Way Perspective with Rituparna. No matter where you listen to us, please rate, review, and share the podcast. This helps me know you are listening. You can also write to me at podcast@yourstorybag.com. I will wait to hear from you.